Scott can help.
Do you need a second to set anything up?
Yeah, we're trying to think if you wanted to, but you do that after. We'll do first, she's going to introduce Scott and we can show something.
I'm sorry, Sean, I'm not prepared to
No, I'm prepared.
So, Susan Davis is a thought leader in international development and civil society innovation. She is a founder and current president and CEO of BRAC USA, an organization created to support arts programs all over the world. Recently, she co-authored the book Social Entrepreneurship, What Everyone Needs to Know with David Bornstein, which all of us have read. In addition, she is a founding board member and immediate past chair of the Grameen Foundation. She also serves on Ashoka's International Board Committee that selects Ashoka Fellows. She is also senior advisor to New York University's Reynolds Program on Social Entrepreneurship. Previously, she led Ashoka's Global Academy for Social Entrepreneurship, co-founded the University Network for Social Entrepreneurship, and oversaw Ashoka's expansion to the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. In addition, she served as a senior advisor to the Director General of the International Labour Organization. Before that, she led the Global Advocacy Group for Women's Environment and Development Organization. She has extensive microcredit experience from her years with the Ford Foundation in Bangladesh and from her work with Women's World Banking. She also served as a funder and volunteer representative to start Ashoka Bangladesh. Earlier, she was the Assistant Director of the Export Trading Company at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. She serves on numerous other boards, including Project Enterprise, Relief Market Women's Fund, and African Women's Development Fund USA. She was on Mary Robinson's Advisory Council of Realizing Rights, the Ethical Globalization Initiative, and currently serves as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She was educated at Georgetown, Harvard, and Oxford Universities. Please join me in welcoming Susan Davis.
I would have severely edited that introduction had I arrived on time.
You've done so many impressive things.
Yeah, but you never read somebody's long bio. But thank you. I understand that you all have actually, did you buy this book or did somebody Xerox it and send it around?
No.
Yeah, you actually did.
Bought it at the library, shared it.
Well, thank you so much for David and I. It was a labor of love. Just so you know, we did not name the book. It's an Oxford University series, What Everyone Needs to Know About Islam, Kosovo, and lo and behold, social entrepreneurship arrived, and they thought it was time for a book, easy format, Q&A, what everyone needs to know about this topic. And well, we were thrilled because the challenge is to make a concept accessible to a wide audience, and we've spent a long time, as you hear in my bio, I've spent a really long time trying to blow wind under the wings of this very powerful idea. So mostly what I'd like to do is engage in a dialogue with you all since you read the book and not make a formal speech. I brought with me my colleague Scott McMillan, who works with me at BRAC. BRAC USA is just downtown. He's been with me a year and a half, I guess, and leads our communications team. He's a business journalist and traveled all over the world, also an entrepreneur, started a cafe in Budapest or someplace, Prague, wherever, Eastern Europe, but that's another story. The main reason I thought you might be interested to talk a little bit more about BRAC, because we do use BRAC and Grameen as Exhibit A and B in the book, right in the beginning. And a lot of what we do at BRAC, I think, is a great example of both the concept applied as well as new opportunities. And who knows, maybe we'll recruit some of you to help us because it's a huge challenge to figure out how we actually eliminate poverty. And that's what this work is about. So one story I'll start with, and then as you're thinking of whatever questions or comments or places you want to take this dialogue, feel free. I will start where I was now quite a while ago, almost 30 years ago, when I was getting ready to plan my 30th birthday party, and I wanted to go to Africa because I'd never gotten to see Africa before. And I was working in the World Trade Center, the old one, doing this work, trying to create the first quasi-public export trading company in the U.S. History. Back then, we were all enamored with the Japanese. Everybody was studying how the Japanese created the shogo shosha, the big trading companies, export trading companies. And in those days, New York and New Jersey, well, let's say the biggest export we had was empty containers out of the marine and air terminals. And the Port Authority is set up to worry about how this is a rational economic entity when all the political jurisdictions of New Jersey and big cities and 2 states, get along. So it's quasi-public, but ultimately under the 2 governors. So we were trying to export the products by small businesses made in New York and New Jersey. Public purpose, because we were worried about jobs. We were worried about the hollowing out of the manufacturing base. We were worried about what we called the inner ring around Manhattan and all the places like the port was trying to create export economic development zones in the Bronx. And we were also trying to look at, well, what had worked for another country. So that's the scene. Hollowing out of manufacturing, need for jobs, all of that doesn't sound like a whole lot has changed, right? But it's trying to figure out something that had never been done before. Trying to accomplish a public purpose with a business model. So it's very interesting. Even back then, I was gravitating to those ideas. So I decided I've got to go see Africa. My professor, one of them from Harvard, said, oh, you got to go talk to this guy at Ford Foundation. He knows everything about all the coolest places. So I go and meet with him like a month later. I walk in. He says, oh, I hope you don't mind, but we have Charles Bailey in town from Bangladesh. We have an opening, and we thought you might be interested. And I said, in Bangladesh? I said, I know nothing about Bangladesh. I mean, I have the album, that's it, And he was like, no, well, just think. We're worried about creating rural jobs, and, you've been also thinking about jobs. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me, right? I was completely turned in another direction. Stopped dead in my tracks, forced to think about something. I walked out and I said, nah, I can't even begin to think of it. Really, I'm just planning my party. They said, no, think about it, you should go see. So I go off, I celebrate my 30th birthday, I do go to Africa, I go to a very cool place, there's a full moon, and as I'm watching the elephants come up to this lodge, I start counting. Sure enough, there's 5, there's 10, there's 20, there's 25. What happens is nothing short of magical. 30 elephants come up to me under a full moon. Being this kid from Louisiana, I take it as a sign, right? That I should take the plunge. I leap into the void. I say, all right, I'm going to Bangladesh. Radically change my life. Now, I tell this story to you because, I don't know, looking around the room, I don't think anybody's probably 30 yet. Maybe 1 or 2 of you. But, right? And most young people, all right, 1 or 2. Most young people really love hearing that I had no clue about this, linear directed path. And part of the story in being able to embrace a field as dynamic and as fluid as social entrepreneurship, and being able to figure out how you use design thinking and get involved in innovation, is to find that place of fearlessness inside yourself, and the courage to take risks with whatever net you can construct for yourself below. But that's part of it. Hence, my association with Grameen, with BRAC, with the women's movement, with trying to figure out how on earth do we get rid of absolute poverty, because I've been exposed now to so much good work. All the problems, yeah, I mean, Bangladesh is the greatest laboratory you could find. All the problems are packed into this very intensely populated, very small space. But all the solutions are also there. And really, it's a privilege for me, and I think now Scott, for us to work with one of the world's greatest social entrepreneurs, and that's the founder of BRAC, Sir Fazli Hassan Abed. He got knighted by the Queen because of his impressive work and story. Most people in America never even heard of him. Now, because of Grameen Foundation and the Nobel Peace Prize and all of that, people have at least heard of Muhammad Yunus, the founder of Grameen Bank. But getting somebody's name and story to break through the amazing noise that goes on in our society and our celebrity-driven culture is really tough. And so that's part of what Americans try to do, is lift up the work of the real sons and daughters of the soil who can, whose work really deserves the spotlight. We can mobilize resources of all kinds, not just philanthropic dollars, but debt and equity, connections with technology, with other resources, partnerships, and talent, brain power, in all kinds of ways. And so that's what we're doing and about. So floor's open. I feel it doesn't have to be questions. It can be challenges. It can be comments. I'm very interested to hear what you're thinking in this space and why you're even taking this class. And after we have, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes maybe, then we'll, or when you're ready, we'll dive into BRAC as a case study. Sound good? Is this a shy group? Go ahead.
We'll get started.
All right.
Nora, did you have something else?
Just from what you just said, a question about the value of raising awareness. You know, you said about like getting his name out through all of the noise versus sort of the on the ground efforts and impacts, where you see how you see the two of those existing in balance for social entrepreneurships, the value of raising awareness of work that's being done and communicating it to the wider world in relation to like the focus in a particular location and community of building localized impact.
I'll start, and you may want to jump in, Scott, on this. I think that we have a penchant for new. You know, new and improved Tide, new and improved toothpaste, and if we're not constantly repackaging, rebranding, bringing out something, we can't catch people's attention, and that's one of the downsides of our culture, I think, in the way we market and package. So a lot of things become flavors of the month, and a lot of things that are really untested, unproven, way too early to be lifted up, get lifted up far too soon. So you can create, you know, bubbles. You can, if you scratch the surface and are really looking for impact, it's not there because there's not a long enough track record. So that's one of the downsides, I think, of overexposure or promotion too soon. But it's part of the, you know, the search for the sexy. And new and startup, usually in our high-tech parlance, gets associated with the place where you can make the most money if you're building to flip, right? So if you understand the venture capital and angel financing route and all of that, it's, I think that mindset applied to this field that sometimes does us a disservice. That said, the innovation cycle is so much shorter because ideas move so quickly. And people riff off of others' ideas, and it is good to be able to have a community that can spread those fast, so that you can, in fact, get something that works. And something that works today may not work tomorrow, may not keep working, and that's part of why I do feel there's continuous adaptation. We don't ever get to a place really where we're in cruise control and we can just put our feet up and rest. And that's part of the frenetic pace that goes into whether it's Silicon Valley or even in the social innovation space. Now, in the noise and sifting through wheat from chaff, I think there's a very important role for the awareness raising that goes beyond marketing to real public education. And that's why one of the things we wanted to do is make sure that the BRAC story got written about in a serious way, got taught, that there are case studies, and and that the examples of a Grameen, of a BRAC, of a Teach for America, that you can actually see rootedness in longevity and track record and impact, and that can influence thinking in a solid way. What would you say to add on it?
I moved from journalism to international development / social enterprise, social innovation. The stories that really seem to resonate strongly, and I understand why, and I sympathize, and I think it's very cool too, is often around technology for the poor. I don't you remember a few years ago there was the hoopla about the $100 crankable laptops, for every child in the universe. And the other couple weeks ago, I believe the New York Times. I don't think it was in the cover, but there was a big splash about essentially what came down to Kindles for African school kids. I am speaking for myself personally now. I'm often really skeptical when I read these stories. I'm skeptical in general, but when I see these, I think to myself, well, from the little that I've learned so far, which is really just the tip of the iceberg, the things that really change people's lives are often amazingly low tech, for one thing. And I traveled all through Africa, over on public transport, going on small, crappy roads. I never once saw a crank-up laptop. I never once saw any of these things that were written about. The cool wheelbarrow with the solar panel and the USB port that's going to transform the lives of the poor. Never once. I saw a ton of mobile phones, right? The mobile phone in Africa is ubiquitous. There are more mobile phones in Africa than there are in the United States, despite the US, I think, having something like 8 times the GDP. Note that the mobile phone was not actually invented as a solution for poverty, right? So I think that what really grabs people's attention and what really works, there's a divergence there. And the trick is to stay focused on what really works in people's lives, which is often, a micro-insurance scheme that ain't that sexy.
I wonder if that has something to do with, I guess, speaking to what we're doing here, like the power of design. I think OLPC, like One Laptop Per Child, had Eve Bahar, who is a pretty famous industrial designer, working with guys from Harvard, and they know storytelling, they know how to use those tools to make what they're doing look sexy and look inspiring to the audience in the West, who they generally design most of their products for. I think it's the same thing with the Light Straw in some ways, and the Hippo Roller, all of which were designed by these design studios in the West that know how to make a product that sort of speaks a common language with people here, and also they can sell that idea and make people feel good here because they know how to do those things, whether or not they're actually having as much impact on the other side.
Well, it's the fact that it sells, but I think it's important to recognize that it comes from a very good place. It comes from a very positive desire to be a change maker, right? And so a designer is like, ooh, what can I come up with that's gonna change things? And it's not because the person wants to get attention or it's just like a slick marketing executive or anything like that. That's not it at all. I think it's important to recognize that the heart is in the right place, and sometimes the solution is in the right place as well. But we can talk about distribution schemes, things that are just, how do you get the laptop to the child?
Yeah.
Well, right, and that's where I think a lot of social innovation thinking or design thinking is going, is on distribution and not just the creation of the widget.
Right.
And we are seeing Frog and IDEO and other groups participating in the spaces that we're in, and I can see the influence of design thinking in not only like last year's Clinton Global Initiative, redesigned the format, as well as the foundation world. Hewlett Foundation has hired IDEO to help redesign part of its strategies and how it's trying to address the population crisis, for example. So there are lots of there are lots of examples that are going beyond also the specific, but I think you're right that the original problem of Western mind share, and how do we get more Western mind share thinking about solutions to solve the problems of the developing world, on a justice and equality argument. That was part of the way Eunice pitched the creation of the Grameen Technology Center. When we did that back in, I think it was like 2001, and created that in Seattle. And part of the whole logic behind it, this was early days before the ICT for development field really did mushroom, and you know, you have so many folks working on mobile technology for development. But just the idea that you could try to get Seattle and Silicon Valley types thinking about the solution, the problems of people in the developing world, and then therefore potential solutions, that was a new idea. It's not that there weren't some people doing it, but not many. So where things have shifted now, decade plus later, is you have much more activity, I think, going on in countries of the South, in the universities. There are more higher education collaborations. BRAC just got included in Berkeley's Higher Education Solutions Network for Development Impact. And they're actually going to try to marry two fields of engineering and economics. And part of, and there was one university consortium that was non-US for the first time. USAID selected Makerere University, and they're going to bring in probably, they're in Kampala, bring in probably 24, I think, other universities on the continent in Africa. And their strategy is to build a resiliency network. And there are others. There are 7. If you Google the Higher Education Solutions Network, you'll see that. And USAID, our tax dollars, put $130 million behind this. Now, part of what they wanted to do was to actually have USAID staff people learn and accompany this whole process. So not just doing it as a traditional, you know, we're the grant maker and we are hiring you, or giving you the money, universities go out and do it. But they want to work together. And so there's not only design thinking, but real collaborative thinking and collaborative leadership skills being ascendant right now. And it's not for collaboration's sake, obviously, it's really collaboration for impact. Because there's a hunger, I think, for people to just get on with it and solve some of these problems. Recognition that when we solve these problems, new ones will crop up that will have unintended consequences, or just, you know, and so that's why the enduring solution is trying to make sure that there are change makers in every community, and that you've got design thinking in every community, and that you've got entrepreneurial ability in every community. And part of the process is trying to bring out the potential in people to even recognize and be conscious that they've got a lot of the skills and resources that they need to solve their problems. Which I suppose is part of the Socratic method that good designers always use in pulling out what's there, right? Sure.
I have to say, like, we've had a lot of people come and talk to us. One, Zoli, who spoke to us about, you know, the time that we're living in all these L curves, which Andrew Zoli, and scared the heck out of me, like his talk. From your book, I got such a positive, like, can do, this is happening, people are, you know, with good intentions are tackling these, like, incredible problems. And then we had Paul Farmer talked about that last mile distribution. Paul, I'm sorry. Last mile distribution.
IDE.
You know, and it's like, we know there's a place out in the world for the kind of thinking that we're doing, but where do you see the most promise in the way, I know there's this new thinking, but like, what are the what are the places that you'd like to see people sort of put their minds to?
Well, I want you to put your minds where your passion is. You know, you'll do your most creative work if you find your space. So the thing that wakes you up at night, that gets you excited when you get up in the morning, the thing that you read on the weekend, I mean, that's the natural passion. And part of what I try to do is find people on our team that, you know, think about this stuff, because it captures mind share, right? In terms of, you know, what's right for you, God only knows. We can show you some of the work of BRAC and talk to you about the problems we're facing and get you to help us think together and you know, imagine what we might do together in the future. I mean, one of the biggest problems we're working on is extreme poverty. Relative poverty, you know, I could always use a bigger apartment, right? I could always use nicer clothes. I mean, relative poverty we take to a point of ridiculousness in our country. And there are different levels, right? So I'm not talking about the ever increasing consumer treadmill where we never know what is enough. I'm talking about a real floor. A real floor for what it means to be human and what we will tolerate in expressing our humanity. That means dealing with absolute hunger and severe malnutrition, the kind of silent tragedy that, you know, CNN and, I mean, as good as it's done in terms of raising global issues, still can't get much attention. Stunting and wasting that happens when little children, you know, don't get enough to eat when they're growing up. The first 0 to 6, you know, or when they're in utero and their moms are not properly nourished. So that first 1,000 days, you know, from conception matters a lot in terms of what people eat. Now, there are solutions like the French company Plumpy Nut that have tried to do and all. And they're okay. There are sprinkles that look at micronutrients, which we've been using in Bangladesh. Ultimately, though, what we need to do is make sure that staple foods are more nutritious. So I'm very excited about the decade of work that Harvest Plus has done with IFPRI to biofortify the staple foods so that if people eat mainly rice or mainly cassava, it actually has more nutritional content, right? So instead of vitamin A supplements, it's being able to grow vegetables and eat more of them, sell the surplus. If you're able to improve the staples, the nutritional content of staples, that's really important. And then it becomes making sure that the last mile, actually, the poorest farmers, the smallholder farmers, get access. And that will happen if we can make sure the prices are either under the other variety or at least competitive and not different. There's lots of other things that we can do together in figuring out, you know, affordable solutions for extreme poverty. And if you, one of the best books that I've read last year and got most excited about, just because it gave me, I mean, albeit it's a techno-optimistic vision of the future, but it gave me a way to imagine we could actually solve our problems, and that's abundance. I don't know if you've read, have you read Peter Diamandis' book, Ben Cutler? Maybe not Ben, but Peter Diamandis started the Synchronicity University? No.
Singularity.
Singularity, thank you. And what he'll do in this book for you is go through like 8 major fields and talk about some of the things that are being worked on now in the, you know, garage stage. But for example,
it's called abundance.
Abundance, and there's probably a 10-minute TED-style talk or something you can cram it on, and the annex is full of the critique, extensive reading list on all of that. Which here, but what's different is mostly in international development, all we read is linear projections of how the problems that we face today are going to get worse. It's all like the equivalent of the cliff, right? Climate change. Oh. You know, population, poverty. Nothing feels like we're actually going to solve it. And if you're going to go out and participate in trying to really solve something, you got to believe you can do it. So that's one part of it. What are the scenarios that actually prevent water wars from becoming water wars, and actually finding solutions? Now maybe I don't forget your name, or you didn't introduce, but you mentioned the straw, right?
Yeah.
What's your name?
Josh.
Josh. So, you know, filtration devices for water are really important. What's preventing the world from having enough fresh drinking water? Is it the lack of water? No. It's the lack of affordable filtration to have clean, safe drinking water. Because we've got tons of water, right? It's just full of salt. Or it's polluted. Or it may not be located in the place that people need it, who are facing water scarcity. So it becomes, there's a technology involved, or many technologies involved at different price points, and then there are access issues that make it a very important issue, because it's an essential, you know, ingredient for life, right? And what's happened over the last few decades is we've treated it as a commodity. We've bottled it, we've sold it, and the land rights for water sources have increasingly been concentrated, right? So the scenario is set up for conflict, huge areas where you can just plot it, and you've got another scenario if you look at what's being worked on right now that could potentially solve this. Nothing easy, there are no panaceas, but that's one example. Another would be something like in health. People, in order to maintain, to know if you're pregnant or not, there was a wonderful invention created, right? You have these little sticks, you pee on it, you find out what color it is, and you learn with pretty good accuracy whether you're pregnant or not. Same kind of technology people are working on for all kinds of things. Imagine if I could just do that and find out if I had malaria. Or if I was needing instead of the way right now we do blood and urine tests, they're much more expensive, and there are not enough labs in really poor places. Being able to reduce the diagnostics to something that is affordable and that someone with less education can actually do. So the other big trend is paraskilling, right? Pushing down to the level where the person lives, in the slum community, in the village community, in that remote place, something that he or she can actually do and provide. And that's how you're pushing the change maker, you know, or the empowered person into the community. So what are the tools in her tool bag? You know, what can she do to be able to treat the most common forms of disease or illness? That's part of what we've tried to do with BRAC's Community Health Promoter Scheme. But there's, you know, there are lots of things that can be invented, can be improved, can have their costs reduced, that will improve health, wealth, and well-being. I'll stop here to get the dialogue flowing. I could go on. Y'all should just be jumping in and interrupting. Please.
Oh, I was going to mention, I just read today in the BBC that someone came up with a mobile phone app for testing urine tests. And so you basically, I guess you pee on something and
on
then
your phone?
Yeah, and then this thing scans it in and like tells you. But what I figured when I read the article, and the guy spoke at TED, and he's done this invention in India, but it seems like you need a smartphone and then you need someone that knows how to operate the thing, because even if you mess up just a little bit, you know, your technology just doesn't work. So
you know, it's this kind of thing that will, there are a lot of things that will get invented here that will be real stretches. And people love the sexy, so they may be able to raise money to test it in a few places and all that. Who knows? Something might work. Part of why a lot of people come to BRAC is they see us as an easy way to test things and roll things out, and God knows we've got lots of gizmos and gadgets that we've been testing and trying to figure out how you can have, when all the handheld devices came out, better ways to do our survey research, to have collection of data for now with patients and stuff. But, you know, still price points matter a lot. And I'd like Scott to use BRAC as an example for you, unless there's some other challenging questions or comments. Because, you know, for us, it's like $32 to educate a kid per year in primary school, the second chance schools. So if you're dealing with a price point of $32, you know, even a phone comes in right now as unaffordable, right? So our challenge is, you know, continuing to use Moore's Law and really driving things down where they can become free as public goods, or you really have creative business models where you cross-subsidize. But all of this R&D has to be focused on the right problems, right? I mean, you have accidental discoveries, but that understanding of what are the real problems is part of your challenge if you're sitting here in New York. What exposure, although, I don't know, maybe some of you are not from, you know, New York in the States, but to the extent that you figure out how you get some real world experience and some connection with partners who have problems, then it's a collaborative process, and it doesn't matter, you know, where you sit, maybe for that part. Anything else? Sure. After Josh, what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah, and then Josh.
I heard a woman from the Calvert Foundation speak about impact investing on
Lisa Hall?
No, Logan something. And she was talking about how they choose kind of where to fund projects and kind of what criteria they use. And how, you know, they try to focus on projects that kind of promise or kind of focus on more systemic impact, but that every once in a while a project will come up that doesn't really address a larger system but is focused on a very specific problem in a specific location. And that they're often incredibly inspiring and exciting and, you know, great people. And so I guess my question is just how, in your experience, can you talk a little bit about kind of those projects that are addressing more large systemic issues versus the kind of smaller scale, not necessarily very scalable projects that are just wonderful and improving the lives of a smaller group of people in a really great way. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm a fan of both, to tell you the truth. I've tried to bias my efforts in using my time on what I see as sustainable or scalable, sustainable institution building initiatives and or at least scalable ideas. Social entrepreneurship is an idea that's scaled, right? I mean, now we have books on it, like degrees on it. But when I first heard the idea, you know, back in 1986 or something, and that, I was like, oh, never heard the term before, but do you mean, and I could point to people because I'd seen the idea at work. So it clicks for people, most people, even though the word, you know, was something new. Microfinance, microcredit back then, is another idea that's scaled. Again, now we have histories that say it wasn't necessarily new, and it's I mean, banking without collateral is not new, but the way it's put together. And years and years of Ashoka interviews have taught me that 90% of the innovation is in the how-to. You know, it's not necessarily inventing the new engine, it's in how the engine works. And so a lot of our social innovation may be termed actually process innovation, and in being able to have that intersectionality where you're bringing different disciplines together, and that's exciting. Things that work and benefit people, even if it's one other person or 10 others, all of that, you know, that's inherently good. Not everybody needs to have the breakthrough idea that scales, not everybody can. To the extent that we're aspiring to solve the problem, that's, I think, the right question. So what's the solution that can try to solve the problem? Now, it may be having 1,000 of you do this thing, right? Whatever it is, solution X. And your sphere can be reaching 100 people or 10,000 people. But if enough of you do it, it works. And maybe you standardize it and it becomes kind of franchise-like. I mean, Ela Bhatt, who is the founder of the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, she created Sewa Bank with her colleagues. Women who are the borrowers are on the board, right? The head loaders, the beady rollers, the urban poor women. They weren't comfortable with growing too big. So at about 50,000 of them, that was like big enough. They were managing the bank, they were a little risk averse, they had more savings than lending, and that was okay. And so what they decided to do to try to spread the idea around India is just more smaller banks on that cooperative model. So the BRAC story of getting really big and massifying is one way. It's not the only way, and there's so many different ways to scale. So I would suggest that, you know, you find where you make your most difference. Josh?
The question I have, I think, is sort of very similar. Looking at reading the book, people like Grameen and BRAC were founded by Harvard economists and guys, or an ex-executive of Shell Oil, people who had experience working in large institutions in some cases.
That's
and
true.
Most of us have never been in that position to start a massive, scalable business, having come from a large business. And so, as somebody who's involved in that, talking to people like us, would you have a piece of advice? What is the first step we should be thinking about as we lead?
The guy who started, though, BRAC, started very small with, you know, the money that he used after he sold his apartment. And he started in one tiny area with a relief effort. I mean, he had no idea. He didn't start out with the grand design. Neither did Eunice. And both, and most social entrepreneurs started off quite small, very modest, without the grand plan. So it's only today, once we've like made it into a big subject and stuff, that it becomes very intimidating. I don't know that that's necessarily the best way. It feels to me that there's so much ego in that I don't know. So
Start small.
I think start small. Scott?
I'm gonna take over.
Yeah.
Um,
I really think that this will be helpful for you, and if we can engage any of you in thinking about BRAC and BRAC issues, I'd love it. So that's the deal.
Cool.
So I'm going to show a short video, but I'll give a little bit of I'll frame it with a short introduction. And this touches on a lot of the things that Susan's been talking about. We like to say that community ownership at BRAC is both a principle and a strategy, in the sense that it's a principle. It should be pretty obvious why, but if not, if a solution is not owned by the community, development done right doesn't come from the outside, in our view. It's not something that's imposed from the outside by Westerners or even by a large organization. It's something that comes from the people who are solving their own problems. Otherwise, it's very difficult for it to gain traction. A strategy, because with the community ownership, you can really scale. And if you get if you get enough communities involved, you can take advantage of economies of scale, and you can establish that sort of sweet spot of pricing that allows allows the system to pay for itself and allows goods to be affordable enough for even the poorest. So and you're going to see this in you're going to hear this from Beatrice in her own words. Beatrice Nakabirwa, she's from Luwero in north of Kampala in Uganda. This was actually a video that was done as a result of a little workshop that trained essentially development field workers in the basics of video recording and editing. So that's kind of a nice way of saying don't expect it to be too slick. It's you know, it was done on the fly, on the cheap, has everything at BRAC. So here we go. Let me know. It looks like you can read the subtitles.
It's only 3 minutes.
I'm going to start over just so you can read that. So,
Yeah, we worked with you.
oops.
Ethan.
She wasn't reading from a script. She wasn't fed those lines. You just have to take my word for it. And by the way, Susan sends her apologies. She had another engagement and had to sneak out while the video was running. You probably all know. So I said community ownership being both a principle and a strategy. This video connects back. I actually thought of playing this one during one of the questions about the sort of split between what appeals to the media, what appeals to Western audiences, and what actually works in the ground. Sometimes the unsexy stuff that actually works in the ground. I think from a communications point of view, I see something like this, and what resonates strongly with me is, does anybody remember how she ended it? That line she said at the end? She said, "My baby died." She said why?
You'd be proud of us.
Ignorance. The baby didn't die of ignorance, literally. The baby died because of measles. But this woman doesn't say, my baby died because of measles. She says, because of ignorance, which is a pretty heavy thing to say, given that she's carried this around with her for so many years and managed to transform it into something so positive. Who among us hasn't experienced some sort of tragedy, disease, death, divorce, horrible breakup? If you haven't, you will.
Trust me.
So that, like when I said, that the impetus to create some sort of change comes from a good place. Sometimes it's just a question of looking at things through the right lens. And if you think about, whatever horrible crap you might have gone through in your own life, and you think of Beatrice, if you look at it the way I look at it, if you look at it what I think is the right way to look at it, it's not that she's so different from us, it's actually the exact opposite, right? So that you have that sort of emotional connection. That's what I like about the video from from an emotional point of view. From a, pedagogical or, from a process point of view, she's a development worker, right? She's not driving around in a big white SUV living in an air-conditioned expat enclave, right? That's not BRAC style. If I'm visiting the field with BRAC, I'm in the back of a motorcycle at best, and unfortunately usually without a helmet. But she says, I'm a leader. I brought development. I'm proud of myself because I brought development to my own community. She understands what it's all about, right? That, and like I said, she's not reading from a script. That's the thing that kind of hooked me on BRAC, and that's why I'm standing here right now. Open up the questions about BRAC. I can't really talk about Susan's book that much, although I have read it.
And how many countries?
11. So the basic, the boilerplate on BRAC.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Founded in 1972 as a limited relief effort, following the War of Liberation from West Pakistan. Soon turned into a lifelong project, and that move, that immediate understanding that the roots of poverty are so entrenched that relief is not really the name of the game. Development is what is going to get to the roots of poverty. That was essential from the very beginning. That realization that there was kind of a new there was something in the air in 1970s post-independence Bangladesh. I think Abid sort of tapped into that and said there's potential for societal change here. If you look at some of the research reports that were done by BRAC in the 1970s, there's one that actually came out in 1980, and it's called The Net. And it examines on a really granular level power relations among village elites in 10 Bangladeshi villages, remote border villages. And it describes how these social networks, and I'm talking about old school, real world social networks obviously, that exist among the village elite, cemented usually through bribery, corruption, shared mutual interests, sometimes blood relations. Those are the things that were keeping the landless people down. And it wasn't that the landless people were submissive or passive or didn't put up a fight, they did. And it records some cases where, guys broke into a women's house and tried to rape them, and the women literally beat the crap out of the guys and held them hostage before going to the police. And they still kind of ended up getting screwed over in the end. And it traces exactly, because the cop was investigating another case involving a racketeering scheme involving one of the council members who was the brother of the ringleader of the guys that were running the smuggling operation that was what was going on when the attempted rape took place. They're basically, they're surrounded in this sort of network of slime and sleaze. And it was only when you exposed that and built up social networks among the landless poor themselves, tenant farmers, sometimes sharecroppers, but sometimes also smallholder farmers. You built up their own social networks. They were actually able to do something. And the first step towards doing that was, in fact, village organizations for microcredit. You get a bunch of women together, 30, 40 women, and you sit them down and say, guys, if you pool your resources and work together, you can actually access capital without having any collateral whatsoever, except for you are the capital, you are the collateral. Your social capital is basically the collateral that will allow you to access credit to grow your businesses. And from there, the story of BRAC is a lot like building a conglomerate. The Economist compared it to Samsung, actually, or a South Korean chaebol. Samsung started as a wool mill in the 1950s, when South Korea was still a developing country, and there wasn't much of a way that the transport logistics weren't really there to get the wool to the market. So they invested in trucks, they invested in logistics schemes, they eventually invested in IT to run the logistics schemes, and now it's Samsung. BRAC pretty much did the same thing. They started with microcredit. That wasn't, you know, they actually started with relief, but they realized that a good way to scale small development efforts was through microcredit. Their first loan was actually before Grameen even existed. And through microcredit, you loan a woman $50 to buy a cow. Great, but milk doesn't go very far before it spoils, right? So the market that she can sell that milk to is basically the village. If she had a transportation system, if you put micro-entrepreneurs into business driving wheelbarrows around with little coolers, they could make a lot more money from those cows, they could pay back the loans faster, and more loans could be made, etc., etc. And that's essentially how BRAC was built. It is now, for instance, the largest non-governmental, it's the second largest dairy in the country, with like 30% market share. It's the largest textile retailer in the country, and it started with microloans to silk farmers. It essentially runs like the Bloomingdale's of Bangladesh. Artificial insemination, I could go on and on. So that's the story of BRAC. It is now in 11 countries, 5 countries in Africa, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, of course. About 90% of its operations, you could say, are still in Bangladesh. And it only went outside Bangladesh in 2002 after the fall of the Taliban. So Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, Uganda, South Sudan, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Haiti, and most recently an education program in the Philippines. Estimated reach is about 126 million people, about 100,000 employees, about as many, probably more than 100,000 micro-franchised entrepreneurs, people like Beatrice, right, who are not on staff. They're earning money from the sale of goods and services. So hundreds of thousands of jobs created because of BRAC, either through part-time employment, full-time employment, teachers. It's also the largest private secular education system in the world. About 1.1 million primary school and pre-primary school students.
So she's an employee of BRAC?
She's not an employee of BRAC.
But she
does not
when you
get
use
money,
the term
any money
development
from
worker, in what context are you using that?
One who brings development. I mean, in the broadest sense of the term.
Okay.
Yeah, I probably should have explained that better at the end. Yeah, she's basically a micro-franchisee, right? So BRAC puts her in business. BRAC writes the manual for how to sell the animal immunizations.
Okay.
Right? She goes around to her neighbors, kind of like an Avon lady or a Tupperware party, and that's how she makes a living. She also has, it's not the only way she makes a living, because she's a smallholder farmer as well, or perhaps a tenant farmer. She has a few goats and cows. But that supplements her income and incentivizes her to do more good. But you can, I mean, at least I buy that her heart's in it. I buy that she actually thinks that she is sort of bringing the modernization to her village. The fact that she's essentially a social entrepreneur, right? She's making money from this, but she's not making money from BRAC. She's making money on her own.
Yes.
BRAC sort of, the way McDonald's gives you the owner's manual to open a McDonald's, it's the same exact thing. The only thing is she doesn't pay a franchising fee to BRAC. The franchising fee, in effect, is she agrees to provide free advice to her neighbors, right? That's BRAC in a nutshell. I know it's not much. It's a very big nutshell.
Yeah.
It's the largest it's the largest NGO in the world by number of employees, and by most measures, actually. Wow. Yes.
How long does it take to actually get into a new country and get like the whole system up?
That's a good question, and it's been 10 years, and I wouldn't say that there's any system that's up and running to the level of Bangladesh or even close. So a huge component of BRAC's success in Bangladesh, both in terms of its outreach and also in terms of its scale, in terms of its in terms of its scale and in terms of development indicators, has to do with the fact that social enterprises like the dairy that I mentioned, Arong, which is the textile company that I mentioned, and microfinance, basically fund about 70 to 80% of the organization's budget, which is about $500 million in Bangladesh. So 20–30% comes from outside donors, and likely will continue for a few more years, as long as the money's available. You know, we'll take it, because poverty is an urgent problem that needs to be solved. Outside Bangladesh, we're nowhere near that. Probably with microfinance, I think in the best case, I think probably BRAC International as a whole might be at most 40% self-financed, but we need outside capital to get these schemes going, because the foreign exchange controls in Bangladesh, it's still a poor country. They don't let you, you know, it would be kind of weird if microfinance payments from lady farmers in Bangladesh were funding the scale-up of health programs in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
The government wouldn't look too highly upon that. So it's actually, in a weird way, it's probably one of the only large organizations, public, private, civil society, whatever, that's that big, whose resource base is essentially held captive. Like, we can't even use that as collateral to borrow. You can't even borrow on those assets because you can't get them out of the country. So imagine if Chevron or ExxonMobil, you know, wanted to expand abroad, but the United States government said, well, you can't really spend your own money doing that. You can't even borrow against it. That's a bit of a challenge. That's one reason that BRAC USA exists. BRAC USA is actually an independent affiliate of BRAC. It's a 501c3 with an independent board of directors that's charged with mobilizing resources, providing program management services, and public education, which includes, you know,
Talking to us.
to you.
Yeah.
You may have said this, but was there an intended audience for this video, or it was mostly just to train? I mean, and other people like us
Yeah.
to show it to other groups.
I mean, it's a weird thing because it was actually a workshop. It was just kind of supposed to be an exercise. It was actually supposed to be practice, right? And the outcome was kind of like, wow, that actually explains.
You couldn't have scripted it though.
Yeah, exactly,
Right.
right? It was supposed to be just an exercise, and then we would move on to the real thing. This was back in August, so we're now on to, we're getting to the real thing now. But yeah, public education in front of donors, prospective donors. I've used it in e-newsletters. It's just anybody that wants to really understand the essence of what we're all about.
Are you challenged right now with USAID funding mechanisms? Because we've had a fair amount of people come in here and talk about 2 years. You know, that's it, and it's a problem.
We actually, I just thought of an
Oh, sorry.
auxiliary answer to that,
Yes.
which is that, and this is something we're exploring, especially in Bangladesh. there is an internal advocacy component of this. We have, in Bangladesh, we have popular theaters where citizen action groups called Polishomaj, which basically means citizen action group or something like it. They get together, and it's a way to organize poor, mostly landless, and mostly women people into to raise their political voice, right? So they can voice their concerns to the local councils, and often provide mediation services amongst themselves if there's a land dispute that the courts really aren't dealing with. They provide those sort of services, often stopping child marriage, just sort of intervening when they see that a family is about to marry off the daughter at the age of 13, and sort of politely saying, well, maybe there's a better way. You should explore the possibility of keeping her in school and think about what investing in her future might do both for you and your descendants, that sort of thing. The video component is a new and interesting angle that we're exploring. In other words, instead of, as people have more and more access to video screens of one sort or another, instead of, or maybe in addition to putting on popular theater shows, actually showing these videos. I mean, and it's it's an empowering thing by itself. So, the USAID question, we haven't really cracked the nut yet of getting a substantial USAID contract, and it's not because we don't want to, but it's, be careful what you wish for.
Right. Well, that's kind of what we've heard from a lot of people.
And I'm not a program manager, so I can't talk about the areas where it's most promising. I'm not really sure. There was a big proposal in water sanitation and hygiene that we went for late last year. Did not happen to get. And every time we don't happen to get it, it's like, oh damn. But I mean, we'll take money. The devil himself has money to give us. And advances our goals. We're there, which is not to say that USAID is the devil. It's just their reporting requirements can be notoriously onerous.
What is your personal sort of mandate or the thing that you could use help with in your day-to-day of what you're doing at BRAC?
Design, infographics, databasing. We need to mine the data that we have, do a better job of that. We're still operating very much as a startup. Okay, we don't have a huge PR budget, or we're not, and we don't have any intention of doing slick infomercials or TV advertising or anything like that. BRAC, and this comes from the very top of the organization. I'm not talking about Susan. I'm talking about Abid himself. BRAC has never been really a marketing savvy organization, and I think that's to its credit. We believe that development cash should be spent on development, not the marketing of development. And the mantra of Sir Fazli was always, keep your head down, focus on your work. Let your work speak for itself. And it served us well. That's served us pretty well so far. There have been cases where we've actually had to turn down media interest in the wake of the, in the wake of the Kony 2012 brouhaha. Newsweek wanted to go to Uganda and do sort of a story about, a very positive sounding story about BRAC, which is the largest NGO in Uganda, and what it's really like in Uganda, sort of how Ugandans themselves have moved on and picked up the pieces following the end of the Kony War. We eventually had to turn them down, and it was disappointing. But the word it actually came from the field staff themselves, who said, this could create problems for us. The Kony theme has become so toxic politically within Uganda as a result of that video that just our journalists showing up and asking questions could create problems for us. So that's a challenge, the marketing challenge. The fact that it's called BRAC and people are like, what's that stand for? And then you have to explain that it used to stand for Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee, and then it changed its name to Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, and then after a while, it was no longer really about Bangladesh, and there's 100,000 of us, so it's not a committee, so it just kind of called BRAC, and it's like the S in Harry S. Truman, and that's what BRAC stands for. It's not really very catchy, is it? Yeah, so that's that comes to mind. It's a small team, very small. So we're still kind of in startup mode. We've been around since 2007 now, but it's still growing. We recently moved from cramped offices in Midtown to a more spacious place right near the World Trade Center, kind of between the World Trade Center and the Brooklyn Bridge in the financial district. So it's an interesting time to be in this space and to be with BRAC.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess, I think this is kind of like a very general BRAC question, but so like BRAC has been around since the 1970s, and you're doing all this, and like what is sort of like why hasn't BRAC solved? I know that the problem with poverty is not
Why
solvable.
is there still poverty?
Yeah, or like what what have been like some of the barriers, or what I guess it's a really stupid question because it's just like patently obvious because it's just not solving. But I don't know. It seems like your impact has been immense, but maybe.
Well, it's been immense in Bangladesh,
Yes.
right? And it's not as though Bangladesh has solved all its problems at all, right? But if you look at the major development indicators of Bangladesh, we've halved maternal mortality since the 1990s. We're on track to reach that Millennium Development Goal. And I believe we're on track to reach the first Millennium Development Goal as well, which is universal primary education, or a certain level of primary education. So essentially, most major development indicators, Bangladesh is doing
So I guess
better than
my question is probably why this model has not been replicated more quickly or more. Like you're in 11 countries now, but like why haven't people just run with it, and like what I guess the marketing issue, but it seems to me like something like this should have just like spread like wildfire. The idea
I like to believe that too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it has to do with the fact that we're based in Bangladesh.
Okay, yeah.
I think that probably is the biggest answer right there. And the centers of power are not.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've read Poverty Capital by Ananya Roy, it's a very good analysis from a sociological point of view. Don't agree with everything she says, but she looks at sort of, let's stop thinking outside the box and let's talk about the box. And the box is essentially defined by the World Bank when it comes to development.
Yeah.
If you're writing about development, you're essentially using the language and nomenclature that is defined by the Washington Census. So to talk about something outside that, and BRAC is just not very good at talking about itself.
Right.
Right. I mean, I shifted the blame to the World Bank in that case, but the truth is, they've not been great themselves at, say, knowledge creation and knowledge management. There's a lot of untapped knowledge there. If you go to the bracresearch.org, is the BRAC Research and Evaluation website, you will find a lot of papers that are impossible to read. They only make sense to the people in the programs themselves. They're built to evaluate programs, point out the failures, point out where things have gone wrong and not gone as expected, so that they can be improved upon internally. It's not, a World Bank focus paper.
Has BRAC ever considered partnering with a group that could actually help you communicate better and kind of tap into those immense knowledge banks, like even a Google or somebody with the
Nike Foundation. Nike Foundation has a communication. We're the recipient of a Nike Foundation communications grant. Nike Foundation is sort of branded the Girl Effect as their name for what BRAC has been doing since the 1970s, mainly with women, but BRAC has been moving more, it's becoming more youth-focused as the years go on. So there has been a movement from women to girls, or at least an expansion down to the recognition that that crucial transition from 10 to 14 is really when the trap doors are there, when girls are most vulnerable. they've been pretty instrumental in developing what limited communications capacity we do have. And part of it has just been the slowly developing the value proposition of why it should really, the media, I can talk about how big BRAC is, but you know, so is Jupiter. And there's storms going on there all the time. But the newspapers don't write about Jupiter, right? Because it doesn't really affect me at all. And I think that has something to do with it. You have to, you know, we need to do a better job of making people understand why they should really care.
Right.
And I think that, you know, part of the solution that I'm exploring is digging into these emotional connections, emphasizing that the entrepreneur in Silicon Valley or wherever has essentially the same, is facing the same set of challenges as an entrepreneur anywhere, which basically means 90% of the world's population. But, you know, Beatrice needs to make sure that her income is higher than her costs, with a little bit left over to feed her children and hopefully pay for school, and, you know, build a better life for herself and her loved ones. This is what an entrepreneur really is setting out to do, right? If you know, a teenage girl in Iowa is really facing the same basic problems, the surface is different, but the same as somebody in the slums of Kampala. Boy says he likes me, should I have sex with him?
This seems
And
like
more.
a project to, some of the classes that we've taken, one being Cheryl's class of communication. You know, this would be an awesome project for her communication class. But I think there's probably some other places where this would fit in really well, so.
Yes, I'm available.
We need
Yeah,
to spread, we need to spread your name and, to the right people, so.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just about creating ambassadors,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Freedom from Want is an excellent book about BRAC if you're really interested in learning more. It's sort of the authorized biography of BRAC by Ian Smiley. That's probably the book I would have recommended rather than Social Entrepreneurship.
Well, actually, I want to say that was for, a bunch of us have said that's been such a nice, we wish we had read that last semester.
Right.
When we very first started.
That's good.
Because it would have been a good overview.
Well, you were saying that the Freedom from Want is better intro to BRAC, or is it better intro to
For sure, it's a
space in
for sure it's a better intro to BRAC, and I think the story of, I mean, Susan's book is a textbook. Ian Smiley's book is a narrative. It kind of sucks you in and gets into nitty-gritty details, sometimes a little bit too much. But there is something there that pulls you through and it makes you understand, you know, it's more of a granular look at one particular organization rather than taking the view from 30,000 feet and trying to explain all of social entrepreneurship, which will take take a semester, obviously, right?
Yeah. Cool.
So, thank you.
Great,
Well,
thank
thank
you.